So by the way, so I'm working on the clay balls. So by the way, small note with regards to the story of Reagan and Bush. Actually, I don't remember nothing from personally from the Reagan administration because I was too young. The first president of the United States that I remember, for my own time as a very young child, but nevertheless I remember the era, was H.W. Bush. So some people ask, okay, so we understand that, we understand your point, but in reality, what kind of advantage did they really actually got from supposedly, assuming that you are right, and they had a leverage over those two presidents, personal leverage. So, but what did they actually get from it? So I should say that the answers to such questions is many times more difficult than it seems in the beginning, because right now, many, if not all of my subscribers, belong to the intelligence communities of this world. So this will not be, anything new to them. But I speak theoretically for any kind of listener. So I should say that, for intelligence people of the intelligence community, this is trivial. But many people don't know that. A lot of the political moves that are, especially in the international scene, in the international sphere, that and we should also say, we should add in interplanetary scene, because it's also relevant to our context, in our context. But many times these moves are either they are cooked for many years, or for many months, by the the intelligence services of the world, and eventually the politicians only sign documents, or maybe it's both designed, planned, and executed by the intelligence services, and nobody in the public even knows about it, unless it's a state like Israel. That tremendous amount of the people of Israel are related to the intelligence and security sectors, because this is Sparta. This is crazy and parasitic, and you know what I think about this country, but it's not a typical country. So in most places, it's not such a huge. Maybe in absolute terms, it's more in China and the United States, but the different the intelligence sectors, of course, are larger, but they have tremendously more larger population. So it's not a very easy question to actually answer. And also, it should be said that the president of the United States is, many times is most people immediately will actually mention him or her, but until now it was only him, as the most powerful person in the world. But this is extremely questionable. That maybe it's not true at all. Maybe it was true in certain points of history, specific points, but as a general statement, it's probably far from true. The way the American politics work is that you have so many so many barriers to do anything, almost anything, when you are the president, that that many times their hands are chained, they can't do anything, almost anything. This is somewhat in that aspect, the United States of America is a little bit similar to the Roman Republic, which also was it's kind of a characteristic of the Republic in Rome, that it was very difficult for the very the high official, the consuls and the very high officials, to actually execute almost anything besides wars. That's why one of the reasons that they liked the Roman Republic was it was called the Republic, as but don't assume that it was more peaceful than the Roman Empire that followed it. It's it was extremely non-democratic, in the modern terms. They like to, war. They always was always occupied with wars. And one of the reasons, not the only one, is that it was very difficult to excel in any other area as a leader, because of situation that is somewhat resembles the situation in the United States. That there are so many barriers, legal barriers for the high officials, and especially the president, to do almost anything. That's why I said, when I started to speak about the issue of the clones, and it was years ago, I mean, no one listened because it was probably, I mean, only available to the Israelis, and they didn't listen because they don't care at all. But as I said back in the day, I mean, if you search for clones, I mean, it's not necessarily like the head of the state, like, I mean, the president or the prime minister. It might be like someone in the intelligence community. That maybe a very powerful like person in the intelligence community that is not known to the public at all. Anyway, so I mean, I'll try to like formulate an answer, even though I don't have like much to say, but I mean, I will say just 2 points like in regards to this question. First of all, it's difficult for me to differentiate between like the Reagan area and the Bush area, because Bush was also vice VP like for and vice president for like 8 years. And I mean, so I will discuss. I mean, them together, like both of them. Like even though I mean the presidency, the combined presidency was like, I mean, an era of 12 years, and several important things happened during the time. I will list 3. 2 are actually not known to the public, at least not to the. I mean, one is not known at all. One is known, but only like to some extent, but not all the details that are extremely important. And one is known. So the one that is known is something that I remember very well as a child, the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein. This was actually an exceptional war, in a way, like exceptional in a way that it was unique. That this war was conducted against Iraq, but the other side was a coalition that was by far the largest coalition that ever formed in the planet Earth in history. It was a huge coalition that contained like ton of many nations that never until that time or since then all of these nations combined their effort together. And of course that in order for that to happen, the Israelis had to left out of it, because if the Israelis were in, such a coalition couldn't be formed, because so many people hate them. So the Israelis stayed out, but it was very, very large coalition against Saddam Hussein. Not only, it's not just, vote in the UN. It was actually coalition when people actually sent force, of course not in equal, share, but yes, it's still remarkable that how large was the coalition actually. So Israel did not participate in the war, even though they were actually a target of the missiles of the Scud missiles of Saddam Hussein. I remember it very well as a child. Actually, interestingly, I remember it as a very fun war. And I'm not the only child, like many children, and you could assume that maybe it would traumatize children, because there was a tremendous fear of chemical weapons that, only much later, even their existence were kind of questionable, as you know, but that's a story for another time. But so we had to wear gas masks and be in special rooms, and the missiles and alarms. But personally, I was 6 or 7 years old, and I remember it is very fun experience, and very long time without school, and fun. Many people left Tel Aviv. We lived in Tel Aviv when I was a child and teenager, and so many people left Tel Aviv, which was the main target for Scuds, and so many actually, if they had option, they went to live for some time in Jerusalem, because it was known during the time. It was a more valiant time, it was an era of chivalry. That it was assumed among the nations of the Middle East that Jerusalem will not be bombarded with missiles, which was actually the case, because actually, Saddam didn't, he never targeted Jerusalem, and nothing actually happened. And yes, it was a correct assumption, maybe due to this, the chivalry assumption. Of course, today, with this kind of romantic notion does not exist, because when there are missiles, Jerusalem is also targeted and hit. Anyway, so we left for Jerusalem for some time, and we lived in the apartment of a friend of my mother's, and very fun, very, very fun. Ton of comedies, both for children and for adults. David שלח אותי, 100 shekel. I remember it very well. Anyway, it should be said that Israel was actually a very one of the benefactors of this war, because I mean, with this regard to Kuwait, I mean, during this time, like the 80s and the 90s, like the 80s and the early 90s, it was kind of like, I mean, a process where, I mean, almost all of the enemies of Israel, like since its inception, were one after another just, I mean, became either like collapsed or became like I mean, scarecrows. And this is still the case right now. That's why, I mean, the Israelis, they cling so much to the Palestinian like issue. I mean, they do everything they can that there will never be peace with the Palestinians, because I mean, there are no other people and they also use the Iranian excuse that nobody, I don't see that anyone even remembers like what's the problem with Iran, not in Iran or in Israel or in the United States. Like, no one remembers like what's actually is the fight about, because they don't share a border. And I mean, there is like, I mean, presumably nothing that, I mean, even like that even like remotely, I mean, connects these two nations. That it's more upon it's actually much more like, I mean, it's more complicated than that. And I've spoken, because there is like a secret layer here, which is extremely important. And I've spoken about it in the past. I'm not going to repeat myself, but actually they were good friends in the past. And like, I mean, they divorced, like very ugly divorce, like, and then they started to hate each other in ways that you cannot understand without understanding first the secret issues, including the Gates issue, and also, I mean, like, I mean, the specific circumstances like of the divorce, because the Iranians, they hate the Israelis not because of like, I mean, presumably some kind of like religious war or stupidities like that. I mean, this is all bullshit. They hate the Israelis because, I mean, they feel like, I mean, they stabbed them in the back during the 70s, and the actual events, I mean, are not known to the public, and no one wants to discuss it because they are shameful to the Iranians, so they will never discuss it. But that's the source of the hatred. It's not something that happened like 1,000 years ago, during like the time of Muhammad, or I don't know, the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. It happened, I mean, before the revolution, and during the time actually there was like a very like fruitful relationship between the two nations. I met quite a few people myself that I mean actually studied like in the Tehran University as young like student. It was actually not uncommon. Like, I mean, not many, but I mean, I actually met several that, I mean, as a young like as a youngsters like in Israel, after like military service in Israel, they chose to actually study in Tehran. Yeah, believe it or not. But there was a major secret like I mean, issue that, I mean, no one speaks about, and it's related to the Gates. But I will not speak about it now, even though I spoke about it in the past. I should also, I mean, the issue is that, I mean, the Israelis, I mean, just, I mean, they do whatever they can, I mean, to keep the fire, like, I mean, to keep like the flame of the Palestinian non-issue and the Iranian non-issue, because all of the other enemies were taken away from them during the 80s and the early 90s. Like, Syria became nothing because they relied on the Soviet Union. This is also true for other nations as well. Now, Egypt, I mean, it's true that, I mean, they like changed their, I mean, their like military supplier from the Russians to the United States, and of course they benefited tremendously during this time. And up until today, they have a very modern army, but that they do not possess any real threat to Israel, because there is like a peace agreement, and no one ever thought like, I mean, of like I mean, it was never like, since like it was signed, I mean, no one like in either side like even thought about like, I mean, canceling this agreement. And so, I mean, they lost all their enemies one after another. And Iraq was like also like a classical enemy of Israel. As I said, they actually bombarded them with missiles. But I mean, the war actually like completely destroyed the Iraq capabilities. Even though Saddam was, as you know, stayed like in his position, but I mean, the Americans and the other like the big coalition, I mean, destroyed their military force completely. This is one issue that is known to the public. Another issue that is half known to the public, and it's not nothing to speak about, because I mean, but we should speak the truth and not like hide behind like, I mean, I mean, conjectures that are, or I mean, assumptions that are easy to digest. As you know, when the Soviet Union dissolved, during the year 1991, there was a huge immigration from the Soviet Empire to Israel, more than 1 million people. And it continued later, but I mean, the large chunk was like during these years, the 1991. And this was a huge immigration wave because I mean the population was only 3 or maybe 4, but not more than 4 million, like the existing population. So I mean it was like in 1 year, I mean a jump of like 25 or percent in population. This of course was not like, I mean it wasn't just like, I mean a coincidence. It was a move, a political move that was, I mean that was planned long ago, like I mean long before it actually happened. And it was like, I mean, planned with the leaders of the Soviet Union and also the American leaders that, I mean, were already in charge here in Israel as they are now. It was a very complicated move. The Israelis gained tremendously. I mean, at least, I mean, we gained a lot of it because many of these actual immigrants were first relatively young, so I mean they had like a working age, I mean, in front of them, like working career, and second, they were far more like educated than, I mean, than like the average in Europe and also in Israel. Like, and all of this is like I mean, like on the back of the dissolved Soviet Union. Like I mean, this was, I mean, all this education was, I mean, came to be, I mean, because of the like universities, like they're very like relatively good, like for certain universities of the Soviet Union, that many, I mean, immigrants like studied, and so Israel is like it, like gained like ton of like doctors, nurses, engineers, and all sorts of like, I mean, other like laboratory workers, and in very short time. Not at all, it's not like 1 million doctors, of course. I mean, there were also whores and pimps and, I mean, like drug dealers. But, I mean, but certainly, I mean, the statistics, I mean, were, I mean, greatly beneficial from like professional like point of view to the Israelis, and they didn't know this is going to happen. The statistics were not like any surprise. Russia itself, I don't think that it was actually the place that most people actually came from. I think the Ukraine is much more people actually came from the Ukraine, and also the other like republics, the USSR. So this was planned years before it actually matured, because it was not like, I mean, something that you can actually, I mean, just in 1 minute, like, I mean, from both sides, even like from the Russian side, I mean, or the Ukraine side, it was also kind of like a move that you need to prepare for. Even the, I mean, the impact on them was much smaller because they are much bigger, but even for them, it wasn't like, I mean, a trivial move. And certainly for Israel, it was like, I mean, a historical move, like say, historical move, and they knew it's going to be that way. Now, of course, this was done with tremendous support of the United States. And now the secret issue is, this is all of this is well known, but the secret issue is that many of these immigrants were actually, I mean, the truth should be said, many of them were pedophiles and homosexuals, as is, like, this population is extremely, I mean, welcomed in Israel. I mean, all other, like, nations, I mean, they hate those people, and not homosexuals, but pedophiles for certain. Like all the other nations, like, I mean, the Israelis, I mean, like, I mean, that is the best kind of like people, like in Israel, like the material for like the elites, of the government and the military and the intelligence services. That's the case. That's the way it is. And as I said many times, other intelligence services also, I mean, they like, I mean, these kind of people. But I mean, in Israel, it's like, I mean, the best kind of people. Now, they also receive Titans quite a bit, because Titans were, I mean, lived in the USSR. There is a gate, I think, in Ukraine. I'm almost certain that it's in Ukraine. This is actually still active. Like the gate in Iran is not active. They stopped, and I mean, God bless them, because I mean, as you know, I mean, the gates are only, I mean, in our time, and presumably, I mean, it was erected like in good intentions. I mean, presumably, I mean, it could be used like in a good way, but it's, for more than 100 years, it is used for atrocities, especially in the hands of the Israelis, but not only. So, I mean, when we take this, when we take these facts into account, of course, that it should be like, I mean, something that, I mean, should be, I mean, something positive that should be said, like with regards to the Iranians. So it was not always like that, by the way. Like, I mean, before the revolution, they actually used it. But never mind. What I wanted to say is this. During the 80s, tremendous chunk of the Israeli intelligence services, and also like even politicians, but like huge amount, many thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people, I don't know exactly the number, just died. It was a huge thing that that was carefully kept like a secret from the general population, and still is kept a secret. And this is due to events that happened like in the time of my predecessor that I mentioned quite a bit in the last couple of days. Of course, I view it as a punishment from God, but as always, when God, whatever God is doing, it has like, manifestation in real life, like, in something that actually, like, that there is like, the divine intervention, happens like, normally, barring like extreme cases that are very few, but normally it like manifests itself in like events that, are part of the mechanism of like, both like of nature's laws, and also the mechanism of like humans, how humans like behave, like the politics of humans. It's not generally it's not like Deus ex machina, like in Megillat Esther. Like mostly it's something the events are organic, like they are caused by divine intervention, but they at the same time they are derived from like other events, and that in kind of like in organic history. That's not very. It's not only my own view. It's a view that is very, very common in all religions. Like for certainly like in Judaism and Islam, and in actually Christians, like they favor like the view of like divine intervention. It's like as in break of nature's law, but so they are a little bit different, like many Christians. But in Islam and Judaism, it's very common to view that way. The miracles, that the intervention is taking place, by the laws that govern both like not the natural world and also human affairs. So yes, of course, it was a punishment from God. Of course, they say something else. They viewed all these events, like whoever remembers these events, and quite a few remember those events because they're still alive. They have their own very twisted view of the events, and everything that is on their mind is just to prove that they were right, and like other nations betrayed them, and presumably like evil aliens betrayed them, and like everyone betrayed them, and that they are the righteous ones, and that everything that happened to them was the fault of other people. And part of this is complete like no accountability at all of all the cruelties that they have done. And you see the result. This is the result. Complete destruction of the state of Israel, because now it will not be like in my predecessor time. Now we will not like the cherubs will not like only take like the intelligence community. Now it's everyone. I swear, everyone. There will not be a living soul in Israel. But back in the 80s, it was thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people, and this includes both titans, females, and Homo sapiens males, and Homo sapiens females. Now, not all died. Like, not all of the intelligence people that were related to the intelligence community died, but many were punished in other ways. For example, my mother and her husband, even though at the time they weren't married, and not until much later than that, but just example, yes, and they were punished in other ways. Maybe we should not speak about it like too much, because it's really not the point right now, but yeah, there were, the people of this land was punished tremendously. Many died and many were punished, and they carry the punishment to this day. And many of them hate the Titans like because of this punishment, even though it's completely irrational. But that's the way, I mean, Jews are. I mean, what can you do? That's the truth. What can I do? This is reality. So, I mean, the problem was in Israel was very severe because they lost a lot of like their intelligence community like almost overnight, in very not really overnight, but I mean in a very short period of time. So this actually was a threat to the existence of Israel, and it was kept a secret, but it was a major threat. They had to rebuild the Shabak and the Mossad very quickly. I mean, not like in a day, but I mean, because I mean, things like that never happened like in a day. But also the effects are not like felt like in a day. I mean, it takes time for such things to actually, for the effect to actually be felt. So I mean, they had some time like to kind of like, I mean, to find like alternative to what happened. Like, I mean, to the people that, I mean, that were lost. But so it wasn't like, I mean, like a military operation that takes like a day or a week. It was a process that took several years, but it was, I mean, it was relatively very like a serious threat to the existence of Israel, because they always liked wars in Israel. I mean, they were dependent like on the military and also the Shabak and the Mossad. And then, so they needed people, but they don't like any kind of people. They like two kinds of people: males, Homo sapienses that are pedophiles and or homosexuals, and females that came from Venus. That's their, I mean, that's what they like. What can you do? And that's what they still like. That's their, like, I mean, that's their preferences with regards to, I mean, to, like, as they say, human resources, HR. And this is actually not only the reference, but it's actually the minimum and the maximum mostly this is the minimum and the maximum qualification that is needed. Like, if you are a female, the minimum and also maximum qualification that is needed from you in order to be part of the Israeli intelligence is that, I mean, your birthplace will be not in Earth. And for males, it's, I mean, you have to not be an heterosexual, preferably pedophile. Like, this is the minimum qualification and also the maximum qualification. This is reality. What can I say? I mean, this is reality. It's a sad reality, and it's very sad in my own context, because these people, I mean, they suffocate me all my life, these creatures. But this is reality. So, I mean, where can they find these people? So, they found it in the USSR. And it was part of the solution to get many people that are like, both men that are like it, like the female that are like that, that were, I mean, there were quite a few of those in the in the USSR. But this kind of like arrangement were, I mean, required like, I mean, huge efforts and like conceding, like, I mean, it required like, I mean, tremendous like sacrifice, both from the Russians, like, and also the Americans. It was an international affair that, I mean, greatly interested, like, of course, the Russians and also the Americans. And the reason that they did it, I mean, was they didn't want like Israel to collapse. And maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it should have been collapsed. I myself, I'm not like certain. Like, I mean, what was the, I mean, should have been like, I mean, maybe it was better that it was collapsed like back then, because it's an evil country and it's going to collapse anyway. But it's kind of like too theoretical, too hypothetical to say, I mean, what's the, like, I mean, in retrospect, I mean, what should have happened? I don't know. But, I mean, they didn't want Israel to collapse. I'm not even sure why. Like, Americans, maybe, presumably, they have, like, I don't know, whatever Jewish lobby, even though it's much weaker than people think. And Americans have other interests in Israel, like the Titans and the tea. The certain American president, personally, it's like their personal favorite, like, drink. Particularly, I mean, two that, I mean, were actually in office during the 80s and early 90s. Like the HW and the Reagan. And I wouldn't be surprised if those were like major consideration in like keeping Israel alive and facilitating like this transfer of like more than 1 million people to Israel, and which like a significant part of them were actually of the two specific populations that are coveted by Israel, specifically when they greatly needed to replenish their HR because they suffered punishment from God. That it did not destroy their intelligence agencies. As I said, personally, I know many people that were alive, that are still alive, and they were part of the related to like relatives of mine. But so not, but they all were also punished for all sorts of punishments, mostly related to fertility. As you understand, I'm not biological child of my mother, by definition. And this was a tremendous effort, tremendous project that it's not that it's not known to the public. Yes, people know about the immigration from Russia. They call it Russia, like even though it was the USSR, but and they left like huge mark like on Israeli society up to this day. And everybody in Israel is aware of it, and most people are very very positive towards it because they understand that this population was greatly like enhanced, like especially like the professional sector in Israel, during the 90s, but there was also a very very serious aspect of how to replenish the tremendously weakened Mossad and Shabak, and this could not have been done without, first of all, the Russians and Ukrainians actually agreeing to that, and I'm not entirely sure why they did it. Part of it is because they didn't want Israel to collapse, which was a concern. And as I said, I'm not sure that maybe if I were them, I would have let Israel collapse. But they are them and me, I am I. But also the Americans also needed to be very active part in this whole arrangement because this related to them significantly. And perhaps, I don't know, it's very difficult to actually quantify such answers to such questions, but perhaps, who knows, as they say, in Mulan, sometimes a single rice, piece of rice is enough to tip the scale, because and it's true, mathematically so, because there is mathematically there must be quantity of rice that tip the scale to one point and another quantity to tip to the other. So yes, so practically and theoretically, one piece of rice is enough to tip a huge scale of rice. So maybe the scale in favor of creating all this huge international arrangement was tipped by the fact that the Reagan was actually under very strong influence of his wife that was addicted to things that at the time were supplied by Israeli agents. Maybe. You cannot quantify such things, it's very difficult. But maybe if not for that fact, Israel would actually been collapsed. Because this was an actuality, it was something that could have happened, and it was a historical past that could have materialized, and many because the Israelis are so dependent on the intelligence community and defense community because they like war so much, and they always they were always like that. So who knows? Maybe this issue with Reagan was the thing that tipped the scale. I don't know. Another issue is something that I know much less about, but the Israelis returned to return to Jurassic Park, as you know, because they are up until now they did their cruelties over there, but their presence in there was not they were not always there. It was intermittent because of their crimes and because other nations forbade them from actually like to go there because of like the devastating effects. So Reagan and also HW were both, Reagan late in its presidency and HW were important in the movement to return to Jurassic Park. I don't have many details, but it's at that time and now as well, Israel cannot do anything important without like the approval of the United States. That's why I hate the United States so much, because the Israelis are Nazis, but I cannot like close my eyes to the fact that the United States are the bosses here. They are the boss. They are the boss like since the early 80s. They decide all the important things, and probably it's better that way because the Israelis are children. Like especially the ones that are in the intelligence community and like in many many parts of politics are dominated by children, like cool, not cute children, cool and like cruel children and like egoistic and disgusting children. So probably it's best that the Americans will have the final word in the important stuff. If this country, in case in the case that you decided like that the country, this state should exist, because it could have been collapsed and it will collapse very soon. So the whole movement of return to Jurassic Park, and maybe I speak about it some other time, but I admit I know very little about it, took place like without with HW and Reagan. It was impossible, especially in such matters. The American president were probably had much more say than maybe had much more say than equivalent matters that take place in the USA. Because as I said, inside the USA, there's so much barriers to anything that the president can do. But paradoxically, sometimes like executing equivalent project or kind of like operation outside the USA is easier for the American president. And I guess that such a thing was the project of return to Jurassic Park, the Israeli return to Jurassic Park, which was extremely ill project and cruel, and everything related to it is completely immoral and an historical error, but one that could have been forecasted, because the Israelis are, if they are known to and also the Jews, if they are known for something, is that they like to repeat their mistakes. This is classical characteristics of Jews, the repetition of mistakes, especially in political sphere. Like if you know anything about the history of the Jews, in Israel, and before that in Judea and in Canaan, and even before that in Canaan, all of these areas, they were always, it was the main characteristic of all of these areas that one of the things the Jews are excel at is repeating the same mistakes, because they don't like change, and they still don't like change. They kept they kept the habit of not liking change. It's kind of a habit that keeps itself actually, but the habit of not change was not changed during the many years that were outside of Israel, and when they returned to Israel, they kept this very precious habit of not changing. So these are kind of partial answers to the question of how is supposedly the clone wife and the tea and the male tea addiction and the female tea how could have they affected politics during the 80s and the 90s.